This podcast is made possible by NetSuite by Oracle.
Hi, this is Brandon Maltash, CFO of Moloco, and you're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 805.
It's virtually daily in terms of how we work with the teams, but we put that version of truth in front of the management team weekly. It is the same set of numbers that our presidents and CROs speak from, same set of numbers that I literally shared yesterday with our investors. So it allows us to keep in very close connection with each other, but to stay in front of what will be issues that come up, and allows us to address them much more quickly. I think the best example of how we're doing that is through this 10-year-based sales cohort analysis, where we're able to identify individuals that are far exceeding what our goals are. And for those that are behind the curve, get the training and enablement that they need to them faster.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Chris Greiner, CFO of Zeta Global. It was not long after Chris Greiner became CFO of IBM's fast-growing analytics division that the gravitational pull IBM maintained on Greiner's finance career building began to give way. While his new divisional CFO title more than validated the 7-year career investment that preceded it, Greiner, like many divisional finance chiefs in many large organizations, discovered the next rung on the company's career ladder becoming somewhat obscure. There's only one top finance job after all, so where do divisional CFOs go? Meanwhile, as a divisional CFO, Greiner began enjoying a wider view into IBM's business development as he sat across the table from different owners and C-suite leaders of middle-market companies. As Greiner tells it, I knew then that I wanted to be on the other side of the table someday. We speak to Chris Greiner about that realization and much more after this. This is it, the putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours. But on your backswing, your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? Poor visibility, because you're still relying on spreadsheets and outdated finance software. To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. Over 28,000 businesses already use NetSuite. For the new year, NetSuite has a new financing program for those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/CFOpod. Head to netsuite.com/CFOpod for this special one-of-a-kind financing offer on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. netsuite.com/CFOpod. Hello, we're speaking with Chris Greiner, CFO of Zeta Global. Chris, welcome.
Jack, super to be here with you.
So, Chris, we always begin with this question. We ask our guests to look back for us and share some of the experiences they feel prepared them for this role, for this CFO role. What would come to mind for you?
Gosh, let me go. I'll give you a few, and I'll actually go way back to kind of make it personal for a bit. What's ironic about me, anyway, is that as a CFO, you got to do a lot of studying, a lot of preparing, especially ahead of earnings. We just had ours yesterday, so it's kind of especially topical. The irony in that was I was not a good student, and that's putting it nicely. And on top of it, I had this chronic stuttering problem. I mean, from reading to siblings to reading in class, it was a pretty big deal and pretty frightening. So to go to a role where you got to read a lot out loud to investors, study a ton, it's just it's great irony that now every 90 days I'm studying more than I ever did during the better part of my growing up lifetime. But in terms of roles that really prepared me to be a CFO, probably a couple in particular come to mind. The first, I had the great fortune, the first half of my career, about 12 plus years, were spent with IBM. And in addition to having incredible mentors, incredible opportunities, it afforded me the opportunity to be in a lot of places across the company and a lot of places across the world. 3 of those 12 years were spent in Asia. It was in the early part of my career, kind of years 5, 6, 7 into my tenure with IBM. I spent 2 years living in Tokyo and a year living in Shanghai. Not only did that really inform and shape my management style, which up until that point was kind of very much looking at U.S., kind of very directing in nature type leadership style, to quickly figuring out in Asia in particular, I needed to evolve to much more consensus collaborating building. That was kind of the easy part. What was hard was navigating that business and really kind of connecting with the culture of the employees there. And it was 16 different countries that spanned the areas that we were primarily doing business in. One comes to mind. So 2 years in Tokyo, a year in Shanghai. The last year was spent in Shanghai. And every day going to the office, if you know Shanghai well, and if your listeners know Shanghai, it's really divided by a river. There's the new side of Shanghai that you famously see the skyline of today. That's Pudong. However, there's an old side of Shanghai, Puxi or Xintandi, which is where I lived. And I could see my building. It was Jinmao Tower, and it was maybe 5 kilometers away. But it was like an hour and a half to 2 hours every day by car. And I had the same driver every single day. And it was a neat opportunity in that hour and a half to 2 hours to practice a little bit of Mandarin. I never really got that proficient. But for the driver to practice his English, and he was remarkable. And I remember one day, this was kind of 2008, time of the Olympics that were being held in Beijing. He was telling me that the next morning I would only have to reserve 30 minutes to get to work. And I was, thinking to myself, how in the world is this possible? Like what changed overnight? But I trusted him and said, okay, pick me up 30 minutes before work. And he did. And we're kind of making our way through the old part of Shanghai before we get on this overpass that spans the river. And, we're going faster. Like light speed in Shanghai is like 35 miles an hour. We're going about 35 miles an hour. And we get to the office, lo and behold, 30 minutes. And I'm trying to ask him in my best broken Mandarin what had changed. And he's doing a much better job in his English telling me what was different. I was guessing, did they change license plates, odd and even? They were kind of always experimenting with traffic in a really innovative way in Shanghai. And we finally get to the tower where we pull around the circle for dropping off every morning. And you can see in this like moment of epiphany when that perfect word comes to mind or the perfect way to explain it, he turns around and says, Mr. Chris, they repainted the lines. And this bridge that we were spanning was always one way in each direction. By simply changing a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road, they actually made it 6, traffic flowed much better. And it kind of was an aha moment for me that typically in the financial role, you can kind of get stuck with the green visor sometimes and really kind of thinking just kind of within the boundary of the lane of your role. This concept of repainting the lines and trying to think about things in a totally different way really shaped a lot of how I approach the role. But it was from that total happenstance, circumstance that, in Shanghai, driving to work that I had done every single day for a year. But in that moment, I always harken back to, I tell stories in a lot of team meetings and can use that as a bridging item. Interestingly, the last one, in terms of what shaped and got me ready to be a CFO, was actually not being a CFO. In fact, as I mentor individuals in the different companies that I've been at, my biggest words of encouragement is get outside of the role of finance. And for me, I had the incredible opportunity at a company called Inovalon. It's a healthcare data and technology company that we took public. It's now since been taken private, incredibly successful company, great leadership team, incredible assets. I had the opportunity as my first role there as the chief product officer. You remember I was coming from a CFO role. And that quickly blossomed into becoming the COO, running aspects of sales, working with the innovation team, of course, working with finance as a partner. But it was really those number of years where I spent outside of finance, where I learned, I think, the greatest lesson that, by the way, applies to CFOs, but I would argue it applies much more broadly than that. And we were fortunate to have an incredible board. One of our board members was Bill Green, who was the chairman of Accenture, and he was on Dell's board, really accomplished, very, very wise person. And I remember sitting in a board meeting, and he posed a very simple question to me. This was before I was the CFO of the company. And he was asking about the best path that I thought about for sustained growth and profitability. And I gave a very financial answer, and I think he knew it was coming. And he kind of paused me halfway before I dug myself too deep. And he said to me, I want you to think about it in a totally different way. I want you to think about your role in the company and how you're driving growth, how you're driving profitability through a formula. You've got to follow the recipe, Chris, in this order. First, I want you to focus on everything that has to do with quality. Fix quality throughout the company first. Once you feel like you've fixed quality, and by the way, that could be the quality of the product that we were building, could be the quality of our processes, quality of our benefits, right, for our employees. Quality goes deep and runs wide. The second area, he said, once you feel like you've fixed quality, I want you to go attack speed. Bring speed to the organization. Build trust. Get rid of red tape. Get rid of the bureaucracy in the organization. And then, only then, after you feel like you've accomplished quality and you've accomplished speed in the organization, then you can focus on productivity. And what's, I think, interesting is that most CFOs, not all, but most CFOs probably start on the other side of that trade, which is beginning with productivity and how do I take cost out, which is, look, you've got to find efficiencies in the business. But what I found through that lesson and through really being responsible for the product, responsible for sales, responsible for the operations of the company in healthcare, right, which has real impacts on the line. When we addressed quality at a deep level, when we built speed and trust in the organization, that's when the business really started to hum and the flywheel started to spin. So kind of different, right? That kind of didn't come from the background of being a really good student. I think I literally still have my flashcards here from last night. Study the heck out of it today. Say a little prayer before each meeting that the stuttering doesn't come back. It hasn't yet.
You had, as we began speaking, you quickly brought us to your Tokyo years. And I know you were at IBM nearly a decade or a little decade or more. I wanted to, and this happened in the first half of that decade. You were abroad. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Now, there is a debate whether international is always a great career move. Now, in companies like IBM, which can move their executives around, and we've had other executives from IBM tell us about their years abroad. From what I can tell, are looking to build their careers inside IBM. They're not thinking outside of IBM. I don't know what it was with you. I mean, when you're abroad, were you ever recruited, or did another company approach you, given you had this experience now living abroad, or is that just not what happens really?
It didn't happen that way for me. I was still pretty early in my career, and there was probably more time under the curve that needed to be spent building that career of diversity of experiences. For me, interestingly enough, I'm a multiple generation IBMer. So my dad spent 35 plus years there. My uncle, 40 plus years there. I still, until recently, had an aunt that worked there. Brothers and sisters are there. So it was, you could build a great career at IBM, and I had all intent to. I think what was interesting, though, is that in one of my last roles there, when I was the CFO of the analytics division, which was one of the birthplaces of Watson, and we were very acquisitive. We were growing both organically, but we were looking for assets to build within that division, a division that's still very, very prominent in IBM today. Almost, you could argue, leads IBM software business. What I saw was the other side of the table. I saw companies that were, call it 200 to 400 people in size, upscale, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, profitable, successful, disrupting markets. And I wanted to be on the other side of that table one day. I knew that for me to get the experiences that I wanted to get, that maybe couldn't be done outside of IBM, that I needed to make that leap. That leap takes trust. And I was fortunate to find that right opportunity at Inovalon, which then led me down a path of, continuing to be driven towards businesses that are disruptive. Data and AI is prominent, but there was an opportunity to transform. And that still to this day is what attracted me to Zeta. and frankly, what keeps me at Zeta, because there's still so much to accomplish.
We like to emphasize when someone makes an investment like you did at IBM, again, a solid decade, and then when it's time to open a new chapter and they move on, and again, forgive me, the name of the company.
In Oakland, yeah.
You make a career investment there as well, 5 years plus, and of course you advance into the CFO role for a number of those years. But before leaving IBM is the transition, segue, whatever you want to call it. That's so challenging for many because they've decided that you came to a decision that you wanted to open a new chapter for your career, and you have to evaluate opportunities to do that. It would be wonderful if there was a CFO role waiting for you, but you know what? Companies are a little skittish. Not everybody in a large enterprise company is CFO ready for a mid-sized company. What was your experience leaving IBM? What led you to finally say, okay, I've done this. I'd like to try something else?
It was tough. I wrestled with it a lot. There's different motivating factors that come to mind. There's money, right, which always creeps into every decision. Again, what I've learned is that should not be the highest. That should be a priority, but shouldn't be the highest. Diverse set of experiences. For me, interestingly enough, at IBM and probably other colleagues that you've had on the podcast who come from kind of larger companies at first, you had this incredible blessing of almost a talentless, like, you can't empty the tank of talent because there's just another person behind that if someone leaves is ready to step in and get that great career opportunity. So what I realized when I went to those mid-sized companies and from leading organizations ranging from finance to HR and others is that muscle of having to develop talent rather than just hire and replace it also needs to be worked out. And, for me, it really kind of opened my eyes up to the importance of building organizational, not just the capacity, but the capability. When you invest in capabilities and you invest in talent, you'd be shocked at how quickly you can scale an organization. And then on top of that, when you have this rule of hiring bar raisers, so someone that is 50% better than the best person on the team, when you have the opportunity to replace talent and you have that level of threshold paired with when you're investing in developing talent, like I had to do kind of when leaving IBM, you can drive transformation rapidly. I've kind of was also something that really opened my eyes up post IBM was having to really invest a disproportionate amount of my time on the organization itself.
When you talked about doing earnings calls and how the communication skills required of you today. And I'm curious where on your journey you were able to acquire those skills and I would think there would be presentations at IBM, but it wasn't as if you were dealing with the analysts and doing the press circuit. What would you tell us? How did you go about acquiring those skills?
I think if my mother was sitting next to me, she'd say the gift of gab probably comes from her. At IBM, it came from, again, great and diverse sets of opportunities. So one of the most crucial roles that I was at IBM, I happened to work for the controller of the company. And all of IBM's measurements, its guidance, its planning, its reporting sat on that desk. And that desk's responsibility was important for a number of reasons. It coordinated all of the 5,000 plus employees that span the financial realm at IBM, but it also had the responsibility to every 2 weeks updating IBM's senior leadership team on the state of the business. So you don't really have the good fortune of going deep. You've got to know how to cover it at the right depth, but the right breadth as well. And with those opportunities came sitting down one-on-one with the CFO, working with who I think is still today one of the best IR people, Patricia Murphy, and getting to listen to Patricia prepare analysts, speak to analysts. Again, you cannot replace these little nuggets of opportunities that give you exposure for when it comes time to do the job. You just get that tiniest of head starts or a big head start. And it was that diverse set of experiences and frankly, great people that seems like always would be the best way to learn.
Okay, well, we'll probably have a few more career-related questions for you, Chris, a little later. But right now, let's find out about Zeta Global. Tell us about this company. What does it do and what are its offerings, really?
Super cool company, kind of early stages of our public life. In fact, we just announced our fourth straight quarter of beating and raising. We went public in June of last year. But the company's been around for a while, 12 plus years building up to this point. And for Zeta, we help marketers, right? So if you think of yourself as a marketer and put yourself in his or her shoes, every single day, what you're thinking about is, how am I going to reach these customers? What is the best way to reach them? And when I do, what do I need to put in front of them to get them to engage, right? And for a marketer today, that's really complex. It's dozens and dozens of different point solutions, ranging from, how do I build the right audience? How do I, once I've created those audiences, find the right place to put it in front of who I want to reach? Is it through social, through email, through connected TV? And I'm doing that thinking about 3 different use cases. How do I acquire new customers? How do I grow my existing customers? And then how do I just keep them? And for Zeta, we've been able to disrupt that buying journey because we have a platform that's able to do all of that in one instance. So it significantly lowers the total cost of ownership for a marketer. But I think more importantly, it drives a much higher ROI and simplifies complex marketing. What's unique about Zeta is our proprietary data set, one of the largest in the world, paired with the fact that our sophisticated AI can build deterministic audiences. So I'm no longer living in this probabilistic realm of, I think I'm going to reach these people, I'll reach most, if not some. We can help brands deterministically reach an individual. And then once we do build that audience that has a very high probability and attributable ROI on that marketing spend, we then in that same platform help them activate, which is the term the industry uses for what channel or where is that end consumer spending their time digitally? Are they spending their time in front of TV shows? And therefore, in a connected TV world, which probably more and more of us are streaming than otherwise, we put the right ad placements in front of them that they want and that they have an interest in, they have an intent for. How do we serve up the right display and site optimization for them on their online browsing time? How do we put the right emails that are going to get them to engage with it? Our platform does all of that. So it's really simplified, complex marketing. Forrester, just a couple weeks ago, released their Wave, where they do, right, I think, phenomenal work. Their work's really interesting because they speak directly with customers. And for the second straight Wave, which now spans about 36 months, Zeta's platform, little old Zeta, compared to who else we compete with, like Salesforce, Adobe, Oracle, their marketing clouds, was rated number 1 as the marketing automation suite. So the product is resonating. It's really differentiated in that it has this combination of data, AI, and activation all in a single platform. That's what we do, and we do better and better every single day.
I just want to, you mentioned the milestone of going public last June. And if we turn back the clock, you arrived in 2020. So you were just over a year earlier, perhaps just as COVID arrives. Tell us a little bit about all of the discussions that were being had in terms of whether an IPO was going to be feasible or the timing of it, or what changed, or what was your thinking as you look back?
Well, it was the motivation to join Zeta was to help it go public. And as you mentioned, when that decision-making process was underway, COVID was on the far reaches of the world away from the United States. It very quickly got there when I joined. So our timeline to public shifted a bit. What's interesting about Zeta is that it gave us the opportunity to really kind of relook at our business model and evolve it quite a bit behind the scenes while COVID was unfolding for everyone. But I think most interesting about our IPO process was it was done in a complete virtual world. I had maybe met the CEO 2-3 times before we all went remote, let alone my own team. So the entire IPO process, from getting the business ready, from engaging with bankers, from working with attorneys, from working with the research analysts that are eventually going to cover the company, to the actual, almost down to the day of going public through the roadshows, was all virtual. And that was harrowing at times, but it's incredible that, again, when you just approach things from a totally different perspective and you don't get locked in with what had been done, you can be even more effective sometimes. And I think our case, it was more effective to work that way. We got a lot done in a very productive way.
Can you give us a sense of when you stepped into the role, what your priorities may have been? I would imagine they're already pretty sophisticated in terms of the types of technologies they had, but I don't know if that's true of this finance function and whether you felt you had all the visibility you needed. What would you tell us about arriving and taking a look at, okay, can I understand where those numbers are or what have you? What was your experience?
I was fortunate. My predecessor was outstanding, and he had built a great team. I added some members of the team from joining, but the basic blocking and tackling of having really good controls in place, good diversity within the team, both geographically as well as skill set wise, that big lifting and heavy lifting was done, which I was very appreciative of. I think what I was bringing to Zeta was a business partnership mindset. Again, going back to, I can relate to our president and COO. I can relate to our heads of sales. I can relate to our head of product and engineering. I don't have the expertise they have, but I spent some time in their shoes. And I was able to approach the role of finance very much from their vantage point, wanting to build a function and organization that sat next to them. That was, an enabler, not an inspector. We were able to, therefore, we got a lot of trust. The CEO and president and their management team gave the financial function an incredible amount of leeway to help in a number of different areas. We are very prominently involved in evolving and shaping and designing the company's new go-to-market model, which was a big focus pre-public. We had a generalist sales model in place. I don't think we were great then at really knowing the depths of what our sellers were doing so that we could help them. And, when I came in and kind of brought all the learnings and patterns that were built from prior companies, went in with very much a mindset of how do we build a sales factory, right? So you think about that factory imagery, there's a raw material aspect to it. And raw material in sales is opportunities. And how do we build part one of that sales factory of always creating opportunities? That goes back to, you got to know the activities of what your sellers are doing. I mean, help them know whether it's got a right ROI attached to it. So we measure calls, we measure meetings, how many of those meetings result in opportunities, how many of those opportunities advance through the sales cycle. So kind of raw materials, part A of that sales factory that we brought to the organization and the discipline. The second part of the sales factory that we think about is the assembly line, right? How do you make sure that those opportunities in working with sales and working with pricing and finance is moving through the funnel with velocity? So you got to put measurements in place. You got to instrumentize the funnel. You got to know what deal cycles are. You have to know, are deals moving through the sales development reps teams, at the right rate and pace. So that was kind of part two of what we built and created an expertise in. And then part three, really where the rubber meets the road, is productivity. How do you make sure that those sellers are being productive? And I think the real change in what we learned here is that we don't think about the sales team just as a unit of one, right? We think about them in their tenure with Zeta. That allows us to hire much more smartly and allows us to make more objective decisions around how they're ramping. So for example, we look at that sales organization by 0 to 12 months with Zeta, 12 to 24 months, and greater than 24 months. We know what great looks like. We know what our best quota carriers look like in each one of those 10-year cohorts. So we can therefore measure against how someone paces against that. What we're seeing is...
How visible is that, though? Can I ask, again, you're as you're explaining to us, it's very dynamic. You're checking the rate of all these aspects of the sales funnel. And I'm just trying to imagine where this information is sort of becoming visible. You're identifying perhaps trouble spots where, why is that rate, continue to grow or shrink, or, why is it doing that? That's not optimal for the rest of the process. Anyway, I'm trying to understand better. So how do you make that visible to the team? And when a correction is needed or when something is detected, is it self-correcting at this point? Or does it actually take a meeting and you have to grab the salespeople around the table? Or are they beginning, and forgive me, I'm rambling here, but I'm just trying to, as you illustrate this, I'm wondering how dynamic it is that, look, the rate's risen. We better get in the next 48 hours. We've got to correct that. Is that actually happening? Or does it take a meeting and, people have to come together and everyone has to agree that it needs to be fixed? Because that's not dynamic if that's happening, right? I mean, so can you give me a flavor of the reality?
Your instinct is dead on. The biggest detriment to being able to affect change in a timely manner is oftentimes, not relying on a single source of truth. So what we started from day one, and we keep getting better at, is integrating all of our systems, from what flows into the opportunity funnel to the pricing that we're driving to the connection of what we're counting on in the financial forecast. All of that sits in a single place. And with high frequency, we put it in front of the right stakeholders. In fact, I often use this term internally around a management system. And a management system to me is a common set of goals that everybody agrees on. So there is a part of the process when you're establishing this where you're educating. Everyone's educating each other. Then you establish with that goal, what are the right metrics? And they can't be downstream metrics. They have to be upstream metrics that allow you to get in front of the issue before it happens, or as much as you can before it happens. And then third is you just wrap a cadence around it. For us, it's virtually daily in terms of how we work with the teams, but we put that version of truth in front of management team weekly. It is the same set of numbers that our presidents and CROs speak from, same set of numbers that I literally shared yesterday with our investors. So it allows us to keep in very close connection with each other, but to stay in front of what will be issues that come up, and allows us to address them much more quickly. I think the best example of how we're doing that is through this 10-year-based sales cohort analysis, where we're able to identify individuals that are far exceeding what our goals are. And for those that are behind the curve, get the training and enablement that they need to them faster. And that, I think, has been a big source of our increasingly ramping sales productivity KPIs that we have in the company. But that single source of truth was enormous, and then instrumenting it so that everybody can see it with the same frequency that I do. They have that same access real time.
Bringing a new salesperson, and I know this isn't your role, but you mentioned sales hires, bringing a new salesperson, identifying the person that's a good match for all of what you just described, someone who's going to be able to understand these metrics and these numbers and respond to them and understand where they are sort of in the lineup, as who's growing the pipeline, where they are they succeeding or failing? What are the qualities of this type of salesperson? They sound as much driven by numbers as ever before. I mean, can you help us understand who are these salespeople that thrive within that environment?
Yeah, I think everyone, right, is on one end of the spectrum or somewhere in the middle. So I've seen sales leaders and sellers be incredibly successful because they have an innate ability to qualitatively, not necessarily quantitatively, but qualitatively understand what's happening with their customers, what's happening with their sellers, and instinctually what's happening with the pipeline. I think with those individuals, you have to create a function that then pairs off with them to make sure that they're also seeing the quantitative side of things, the data-driven side of things. And that's a lot of trust, right? Because there are certainly times where the financial organization can take on a profile of being a traffic cop. Sales operations could be the same way. You just can't allow yourself to get into inspection mode. You lose trust. So, but with that kind of more qualitative, instinct-driven seller, you got to pair up with them, in my opinion, great data-driven people that can be their right or left hand. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got folks that just kind of, their North Star is where the metrics are pointing that day. And, those are really fun to work with. The trappings of that is that you can go down some dark places where the metrics go and not lift your head up over the horizon and remember that, there's still a qualitative aspect to things and great relationship building that ultimately drives sales. So not surprisingly, it's the seller that probably lands in the middle that is the most successful. And it's certainly the profile that here at Zeta we've been hiring for. I mean, I couldn't be more fortunate to work with chief revenue officers in our businesses that have a true appreciation for what we're doing for them. We've got great trust with them. But at the same time, it's their business to run, right? And we're there to help make them more successful.
KPIs is something, of course, and you touched on probably 24 of them. But I'm wondering which ones are always top of mind for you, really, and meaning, and there's probably only a handful that you're watching hourly. I don't know, but in this environment, who knows? Maybe. Can you name a few of the KPIs that you're best friends with?
In good times, in non-volatile times, I ask 3 questions. And I've always found it to keep it simple is the best. Are we creating enough pipeline? Are we progressing it fast enough? And are our sellers getting to the right level of productivity? And the KPIs under that, not surprising, are activity-based. How many deals are making their way into the funnel? What's the size of those deals? What are, how quickly are they moving from stage to stage to stage and getting closed? And then what percentage of our sellers are hitting their quota? More importantly, recently, is in the setting of macro uncertainty, whether it's, and we're fortunate that we don't have an exposure firsthand to Ukraine or Russia, and only about 5% of our revenues are international. But in a world where you've got to think about that, you've got to think about inflation, you've got to think about the potential downturn and what impact that makes on business. One of the areas that we prepared for the most ahead of yesterday's earnings call is making sure that we had a qualitative view from our sellers and hearing directly from our customers, but an empirical way to support it. So 3 new metrics took on greater importance to your question. And a great question in times like this, what do you have to look at maybe that's different? For us, and what I've seen, that in difficult times or in times of recession or more volatile, the canary in the coal mine from a sales KPI perspective can be longer deal cycles, can be customers wanting to take a smaller initial purchase price bite off of the product. So kind of going in with smaller average sales prices than larger, and contract durations getting shorter. So we looked at each of those areas in detail. For us, we were fortunate that we found, upon looking at this, that we looked a year ago, 3 quarters ago, 2 quarters ago, 90 days ago, our sales cycles are the same. So we weren't seeing an elongation of that process. That was reassuring. At the same time, our deal sizes were getting bigger, which was also a positive indicator for us, and they were getting longer. So early predictive metrics of what could be kind of the evolving, different buying environment, we weren't seeing. And at the same time, when we look out into the pipeline, we were fortunate enough that our pipelines are growing 40% year to year in count, 50% by value. But we matched that those observations from a data perspective up with what we were hearing from our sellers, from our customers in particular. And what our customers are saying is that, in particular, they're leaning in right now on solutions that allow them to be more efficient with their marketing dollar with verifiable ROI. I get that, because as a CFO, I'm asking that question every day: is what's the ROI? Can I verify it? Can I measure it? Can I attribute it? That's the power of our platform. That's truly the value proposition we bring. From back how we started about Zeta Global, we're able to lower the total cost of ownership. And because we have proprietary data sets that allow our customers to be deterministic in who they're targeting, we're able to drive a verifiable, attributable ROI back to our work. So that product value prop is resonating. It resonates in any market, but especially in a market where you're looking at efficiency in particular. So a really cool question, but it's very topical.
Chris, when I want to ask you just about your FP&A mindset here with a specific question. When you're looking to hire an FP&A professional today, what are you looking for? What's on that resume that you're looking at?
Super question. And I'm biased because I happen to be working with my head of FP&A now for almost 10 years. We were together at IBM. We were together at Novalon, together at LivePerson, and together here at Zeta. And what I look for in particular is what is he strong at that I'm not? And he's exceptional in a lot of areas that I'm not. He's a capital markets genius. He instruments, automates, builds great teams. Admire him in that. But again, he doesn't think in the spreadsheet. He's always thinking and connecting the spreadsheet to what the business is experiencing and how to connect and help them. And I find that bigger perspective, not getting stuck. If you're a chef, the last thing you want to do is kind of get buried in step-by-step approach of how to make a meal. You gotta know how it's all coming together. And my head of FP&A, who again now 10 years with, I think, does that exceptionally well.
Well, we're up to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment. And this is where we're just looking for one story or anecdote that you had along something experience you had along the way that allowed you to identify a risk or an opportunity because of your lines of sight into the organization as a finance executive. Does anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Gosh, for me, it and probably with most, it happens with the accumulation of experience. And if you go back to that story we talked about of quality, speed, and productivity, when I was at LivePerson, which is the company right before Zeta, and what's great about, and most founders, and certainly this founder, is that there's an appetite to want to do everything at once, which is great. But we need to come up with a formula for doing that. And I knew that this, quality and speed were going to be important because we were entering into hyper growth. We had a very disruptive product that was really resonating in the market. And we wanted to invest more in that product and invest in sales. But at the same time, we wanted to keep an eye on efficiency. And I remember sitting down for lunch and kind of talking through this concept with my boss. And this concept of a barbell. And what we ended up thinking about is, how do we put our resources and our investment closest to code and closest to the customer? Because that is what drives the business, great product and great sellers. Everything else in the middle, we wanted to think about differently. We wanted to automate. We wanted to get more efficient there. So for us, that closer to code was more engineers, more product people. That closer to customers, more sellers, more marketers. How do we kind of move the center of gravity out from the middle and onto the ends where there's truly value created in the company? And that became our guidepost for how we hired, for how we invested. It happened to also be the guidepost for everything in the middle was really G&A anyway. And, between me and my colleagues, that was kind of the internal shared services teams. That was our job to automate and our job to get more efficient. It made working with the sales team and the product team easier because we were going to give them more. And we had to look upon ourselves as giving ourselves less. So it was a really interesting moment. It's since, again, it's kind of been one of those things that's in the back of my mind always, is that it comes from quality and speed. So if you think about closer to code, closer to customer, the closer to code is where quality comes into play. The closer to customer is where speed comes into play. So this maybe not having to do it serially, but being able to do it concurrently, focus on quality and speed at the same time, was a really interesting lesson learned. And I think it was part of what allowed us to really transform and drive exciting levels of growth and significant market cap and shareholder value creation.
The business landscape is changing quickly. As the pressure to manage expenses efficiently and strategically increases, you need solutions that not only help drive down costs and improve efficiencies, but meet the changing needs of your business. At U.S. Bank, we can help. We'll work with you to uncover your specific payment challenges and bring you proactive and innovative solutions and strategies that help you meet the financial goals of your organization. Our commitment to doing the right thing for our customers has earned us the designation of one of the world's most ethical companies from the Ethisphere Institute for 6 years in a row. To learn more, visit us at usbpayment.com. We're going to jump to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where we ask you several quick questions intended to inspire and inform future finance leaders. We like to begin by asking you to look back to your first 30 days or 60 days as a CFO. So this was one of your earlier tours of duty as a CFO. If you could go back in time and just share a piece of advice for yourself, that first 60 days you took on all the responsibilities that come with a C-suite CFO title, what would that be?
I was very inwardly focused, and I think you have to keep a balance of obviously knowing and having a pulse and instrumentation of what's happening inside the walls of your company. But you got to get out and talk to customers. You have to get out and talk to shareholders, talk to analysts, talk to the people that are influencing the ecosystem of where you're competing and living every day. And I think for those first 60 days, I was so focused on doing the CFO job and kind of forgetting that the CFO job was not just internal, it was external. And for me, if I could go back and give myself a little bit of a nudge, I would have said more time spent externally than just internally in those early days.
We'd like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side of things, wondering if you have a habit that you're known for or part of a daily routine. It might be something a family member might tell us, but we're looking for what sets you apart out there. This is what Chris does. This is what he's known for. Anything come to mind?
I need my recharge time as much as anybody, and for me it could be hitting the ball on the range, putting quietly, chipping, even with family. I am definitely someone that the motor runs fast but also needs a rest. So for me, it's that finding recharge time. It could be very long walks, just kind of listening to podcasts like yours and others, I love podcasts. I love that medium. I think it's just, you can kind of zone out at times and zone in. So for me, that's really important.
Ask, you mentioned your father was an IBMer. Did you say your grandfather was an IBMer?
Father, uncles, aunts,
Uncles.
sister, brother.
Oh,
Yeah, it runs the gamut.
so was Dad with mainframes in the desktop era, or where was his decade or more? Was that his period of time?
Yeah. He was pricing those at one point. He was pricing software. He was doing acquisition integrations, CIO's office at the end of his career. So he kind of was a good beacon for me in the value of bouncing around and getting a lot of different experiences and cousins, uncles that were controllers and CFOs of the company as well. So I definitely bled blue.
Well, do you have a book for us that you'd like to recommend? I told you I was going to put you on the spot with this.
That one up there is good. Grit. Check it out. Andrew Duckworth.
There you go. And it is a popular book on this podcast. So thank you for highlighting it again for us. Wanted to ask you our final question, Chris. We're up to it. And we want you to look forward now for us the next 12 months and share with us your priorities as finance leader at Zeta. What would that be?
Three things are kind of always top of mind for me. It's how do I, as a CFO and as a broader member of the management team, do a good job every day of connecting the strategy of the company to its execution. So that's kind of point one. And I think all of these areas, by the way, I'm going to mention, you can really develop yourself. There are tools to hone these skills. So connecting strategy to execution, really, really important in any role, especially mine. Focusing on building, again, as we talked about, organizational capabilities, which then expand the capacity of the team to do more. So I'm very much top of mind of how do I give people the right development opportunities? How do I pull them aside and tell them what's working really well that they're doing? Hey, you want to maybe try a different strategy sometimes. There's time spent on that. And then third is execution, right? Winning, but making sure that people understand that, and myself, frankly, that as you deliver results, you've got to deliver it the right way. So not only do you have to have a high integrity in how you're getting the results, especially in the role of finance, obviously, but you can't be someone that runs through brick walls or leaves a big wake behind you. Just no one's going to want to work with you a second and a third time. And kind of going back to those days in Tokyo and very quickly figuring out that they knew in 2 years I'd be gone and there'd be another person behind me. If I was going to be successful, I needed to learn that collaboration and consensus building. So really those three areas are what I work on and think about all the time. And if I'm doing those well, I'll be able to help the company be more successful.
Chris Greiner, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Jack, I appreciate it. It was awesome. Thank you very much.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.